Alright, Lego here is back again with another shadow project. I'm probably never going to run out of those, so for those interested, here is yet another one. Um, I felt like this was a nice continuation from the project I made with the Rise of the Tomb Raider front picture, where I took the iconic stance of the flare and made that into a shadow project. I felt it was only right to do the same thing with the first game, the 2013 reboot. So I found this picture of the cover art, and I just plopped that in there and started tracing right away because I know, as usual, if I try to do an auto trace, it's going to be too noisy. There's too much going on to get a clean profile. And as usual, this lets me add and remove elements as I see fit, because as the as it usually goes, even though you might have a good picture, it might not make a good shadow because of the way things get lost. If you have things, certain profiles are better um, at being represented by a shadow than others. So some poses and some um, some pictures with the way they are. What's the word? The proportions and the it's gone right now. Anyway, certain pictures make better shadows than others, and this is one of them where I made some slight alterations throughout to better represent the actual proportions of the body. But otherwise, I kept this fairly simple. I made a manual trace there, and now you can see me adding some hairs just by using the hand free tool with the power stroke added. So that's a very simple way to make small strands of hair. I've done this before. And then I'm making some slight alterations to the lips and the face because it looked a bit weird in silhouette form, even though it doesn't from the real picture. So I tried to make that less weird. The ponytail was a bit of a thing as well. So anything that requires extra attention, by now I do those separately. So that may be hands, it can be hair, it can be any extra utilities. I tend to do those separately now. So this is an example of that. The strands of hair needed some extra attention, so I made it separately afterwards so I can focus on that without messing up the base shape of her figure. But there's not a lot to it. It's just a bunch of nodes and simple shapes that I add in, and then in the end, I just unionize the whole thing together so it becomes part of the whole. But it just adds a little bit extra to get that extra messiness. And you can see here, I didn't actually recreate all of the hair because I wanted the ponytail look, and that doesn't really come through that well in silhouette if I try to retrace the hair the way it was done in the actual shot. So that's a little alteration I made as well, just to better fit a shadow profile. Messing about with some details. I mean, at this point, you guys know the drill. There's not a lot of new information to share here. It's the same techniques that I used throughout the various projects. I will say though, you can see I add a little triangle there. Originally, there's no space, there's no air right there, but I needed the little triangle to separate her arm from her torso because it makes for a lot. It makes it a lot easier to see the actual composition. Composition, that's the word. Composition. It makes it easier to see the composition that I was going for. It adds a bit more clarity to what is actually supposed to be happening on screen. So that mass of her arms and her torso just being one big blob didn't really work that well. So I changed the composition slightly by adding that little hole there past her elbow, so you can actually see the arm going down and bending. It's a really small detail, but it adds a lot in terms of clarity and just making everything easy to see and decipher what is what, like what part of her body is going on here. The bow, nothing special, just add it in there separately because I might decide to do some color work on this separately. And in case I want that, I'm going to have to trace it separately. So the same thing goes for the ice picks. I know for a fact I want to do a bit of color work differently from the silhouette, so I'm tracing those individually so that I have the freedom to do that if I want to. And then I'm just putting it just right on top there. Right, so that looks pretty okay. I'm just adding in some small details in case I wanted to do some color work so it blends together a little bit better. But that's pretty much it for the silhouette. It looks recognizable and the composition is good for this type of work. So having done a quick background there, I'm just about to start on the text. And for this project, I'm going to actually use the tagline of the rebooted Tomb Raider game itself. So that would be 4 words interspersed throughout, and I'm still going to use my Skeleton Sherman because I really like that, but I'm going to space it out a bit. It doesn't. It lends itself nicely to being thrown about. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just making up the prototyping, proto writing as I go. Blue is for cutting, and red is just for text. And then I'm just mapping out the letters as I go. And once I'm happy with the way it looks, I'll go ahead and start the destructive editing in cutting it, making a backup there, starting to see how I can fit the different letters together, and overall just actually writing the piece. And now, because this is Skeleton Sherman, I want to tie it all together in some way. So instead of regular Sherman text, which is just floating words floating about, I did want to try and connect it the same way I've done previously with the Skeleton Sherman being more minimalistic. So I'm taking out chunks of the letters that I don't necessarily need in order for it to be readable. So I'm taking away bits and pieces while still maintaining readability, sort of. Um, it's a bit of a stretch, but if you know what this is about, then you should have no problems deciphering it. And again, I'm not actually taking out any elements that are necessary to the actual reading. I'm just taking out small bits and pieces to make it look more well skeletal, like the bare minimum necessary to read. Um, and I did really want to tie it together, so that's why there are these extra circular arcs going from one word to the next. They're not necessary in any way. I just like having them there to sort of bind the whole project together. Um, so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just figuring out how I can mess about with the lines, taking as much away as I can, but still keeping the essentials in place. And having taken the backup of that prior to actually going ahead and adding the effects, it's time to add some power strokes. Um, Not a ton of lines to work with, but it gets the job done. And this is minimalistic in its at its core. So I mean, it makes sense for me to not go overboard in the amount of different effects that I add. Just a lot of tapering, so that words taper out in a very satisfying way. At least I think so. And apart from that, there's not a ton of stuff that I'm doing with it. Um it is a pretty simple sentence, so there's not a ton of work that needs to be done. And that is about it. So now I'm finalizing the design, making the whole thing into one unionized path, and then I'm just doing some very basic color work. I wanted to keep this black and white because that is the sort of palette of the original game front cover design. It was very black and white, very gray, and very like it was pretty minimalistic as well. So I'm keeping it in that tone, black and whites. I'm adding some distress all over the place with something I'm about to go into more detail about, the hatch effect. You can see I'm playing around with it a bit there, trying to get some hatches going. That was a pretty distinct style of the front cover, so I'm trying to mimic that a little bit, and it also gives some nice contrast to the black, uh, scratching into the surface almost. And I'm doing the same thing as a backdrop for the text, so it gives that same textured, almost like finish in the background to sort of contrast the background itself just being black. Um, and I also briefly toyed about with doing some shadow smoke thingy. Um, I'm not quite sure if I like it yet, so it's just temporarily made in the background there. I might keep it, I might not. It depends on the clarity I want to bring out. But I am going to, as you can see there, taking some basic circles and messing about with the hatching a bit as well for that. Trying to keep the same orientation and angle as the centerpiece so that it doesn't look like five different scratches, but sort of same, uh, something that might be belonging to the same background texture. And then I'm adding a basic gradient to just kind of blur it out so that it doesn't look as sharp in the edges, um, because I don't want it to stand out necessarily, but I just want to give it that nice contrast to the actual text. Then coloring in the ice picks a little bit. The ice pick, I just want a hint of red to sort of offset the pig itself from the background. It is a pretty iconic, at this point, it's a pretty iconic tool of hers. So I always want to highlight it just a little bit, and you can see I just added a little extra piece there, a sort of edge to sort of give it a bit of a highlight or some backlight. And if I did that today again, I probably would remake this as a. I would probably change the way I did this to a clip instead of just an extra path. But it got the job done, and it's a pretty minimalistic touch, so I don't really mind. But that's pretty much it. Just a little bit of light at the bow to give the corners and the outer edges of the bow a little bit of light, and then some basic shading for the text. And I ended up actually removing most of the smoke, so her figure stands out more clearly. And at this point, I am pretty happy. I'm just adding a little bit of light to the text. It didn't pop nearly as much as I wanted, so I'm just adding a smidge more of that, and I'm pretty sure this is it. Yeah. So just a little bit of a border there, and yeah, I think this is yeah, I think this is it. I'm pretty happy with this. So that's another project done. Thank you for watching.